The Clippers were already running when she sat down in that chair. She didn't fight it, didn't flinch, didn't say a single word. She just looked straight ahead while the whole yard watched. 200 soldiers, every one of them staring as Sergeant Victor Kane circled her like a predator who'd finally cornered something he thought was prey. They thought they were watching a woman break. They had no idea they were making the biggest mistake of their entire military careers. And just 6 days later, a 4-star general would stand in that same yard, look those officers dead in the eye, and say one word that would end everything they had ever built. But before that moment comes, you need to understand how it started. 2 weeks before the Clippers, before the laughter, before 200 witnesses watched what they thought was a humiliation, there was a conversation in an office 1,400 miles away that would set all of this in motion. General Frank Sutton's office sat on the 3rd floor of Regional Command South, overlooking a parade ground where young soldiers ran formations in the early autumn heat. The general was 68 years old, decorated from 3 decades of service that had taken him from the jungles of Central America to the mountains of Afghanistan and back again. His face carried the particular weathering of a man who had earned every scar, every promotion, every gray hair on his head the hard way. He sat behind his desk with a file folder in front of him that was thinner than it should have been for what it represented. Across from him, standing at parade rest because she hadn't been offered a seat yet, was Colonel Elena Reese. She was 44 years old, lean in the way people get when they've spent 2 decades doing hard things in difficult places. Her hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, pulled back in a regulation bun. Her eyes were steel, the kind that didn't look away when someone was measuring her. Sutton had known her for 16 years. He had been a colonel himself when she was a captain, and he had watched her career unfold with the particular attention of a mentor who recognizes excellence when he sees it. Combat engineer first, then criminal investigations, when her aptitude for reading systems and finding fractures became impossible to ignore. She had a mind that worked like a scalpel, precise and unforgiving, cutting straight to the heart of whatever corruption or incompetence she was sent to find. Which was exactly why she was standing in his office now. "Sit down, Elena," Sutton said. Not a command, an invitation. She sat. He pushed the thin file folder across the desk toward her. She didn't open it yet. She just looked at him, waiting for him to frame what she already suspected this conversation would be about. "Pine Valley Training Base," Sutton said. "You heard of it? North Georgia, mid-size facility, primarily handles advanced tactical training for infantry personnel, rotating through for specialized certifications." "That's the official description," Sutton said. "Here's the unofficial one. For the past 18 months, we've been getting complaints. Not formal reports, complaints, whispers, phone calls from family members, letters that don't go through official channels because the people writing them don't trust official channels anymore." He leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. "Harassment, intimidation, systematic abuse disguised as discipline, evaluation scores that don't match observed performance, personnel files that get altered after the fact, and at the center of all of it, 2 names that keep coming up, Sergeant Victor Kane and Major Owen Briggs." Elena's expression didn't change. She was listening the way she always listened, with her whole attention focused like a beam of light that didn't waver. "We've sent in auditors," Sutton continued, "standard inspections, by-the-book evaluations. Everything comes back clean. Because Kane and Briggs know exactly when we're coming, exactly what we're looking for, and exactly how to put on the right show for exactly as long as they need to." He paused. "So I need someone they won't see coming, someone they'll underestimate so completely that they won't even bother putting on the show. Someone who can get inside, document everything, and build a case so airtight that when we finally move, there won't be anywhere left for them to hide." Elena looked at the file folder. Then she looked back at Sutton. "You want me to go in undercover," she said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to volunteer to go in undercover," Sutton corrected. Because this isn't an order, Elena. This is me asking if you're willing to do something that's going to be harder than anything you've done in 22 years of service. She opened the file folder. Inside was a personnel transfer document with her name on it, stripped of everything except the bare minimum. No rank, no deployment history, no commendations. Just her name, her date of birth, her blood type, and a single line that read, "Administrative reassignment pending evaluation." "A blank file," she said. "A ghost file," Sutton said. "You'll arrive at Pine Valley as a transfer nobody asked for and nobody wants. No rank insignia, no explanation, just another body they have to process through their system. And they'll treat me exactly the way they treat everyone they think doesn't belong there," Elena said. Sutton met her eyes. "They'll treat you worse," he said quietly, "because you're a woman. And from everything we've gathered, Kane has very specific ideas about women in combat roles, none of them good." The room was quiet for a moment. "How long?" Elena asked. "As long as it takes to document a pattern that holds up in a court-martial. A week, maybe 2. And I'll be completely on my own. You'll have a contact number for emergencies, but yes, operationally, you'll be isolated. No backup, no extraction plan unless you signal that your safety is compromised to the point where the operation needs to abort." Elena looked at the transfer document again. She thought about her daughter Maya, who was 12 years old and staying with her brother while Elena was deployed. Smart girl, asked hard questions, wanted to understand the world in ways that made Elena proud and terrified in equal measure. She thought about what it would mean to walk into a place designed to break people and let them think they were succeeding. "When do I leave?" she said. Sutton allowed himself the smallest smile. 3 days, he said. "You'll arrive on the morning bus. Pine Valley doesn't know you're coming until you step off that transport." Elena closed the file folder. "Then I better get my affairs in order," she said. She stood. Sutton stood with her. "Elena," he said, and his voice had changed. Not general to colonel anymore. Mentor to someone he cared about. "They're going to do everything they can to make you feel like you don't belong there. Like you're not good enough. Like you're a mistake that needs to be corrected." "I know," she said. "And you can't break," Sutton said. "Not once, not even a crack. Because the moment they see weakness, the moment they think they've gotten to you, they'll escalate in ways that become dangerous. You understand that?" Elena looked at him with those steel-gray eyes that had stared down everything from insurgent ambushes to bureaucratic corruption and never wavered once. "Sir," she said, "I've been not breaking for 22 years. I think I can manage another week or 2. Sutton nodded. "Good hunting, Colonel," he said. She saluted. He returned it. And 3 days later, Elena Reese stepped onto a transport bus, heading north to a training base that had no idea what was coming through its gates. The bus pulled into Pine Valley Military Training Base at 6:43 in the morning, 22 minutes behind schedule, which was already the first thing Sergeant Victor Kane used against her. Kane was standing at the gate with his arms crossed and his jaw set when the transport vehicle groaned to a stop on the gravel road. He was a thick man, built like something you'd find in a gym that smelled like old rubber and violence. Somewhere in his early 40s, with a face that had learned early how to intimidate and had never bothered learning anything else. He had been stationed at Pine Valley for 11 years, and in 11 years, he had perfected the art of establishing dominance the moment a new soldier stepped off a bus. He watched the door swing open. He expected someone young, maybe, someone nervous, someone who moved like they were trying to prove something. What he got instead was a woman in a faded utility uniform who moved like she had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. Elena Reese stepped off the bus carrying one worn duffel bag over her left shoulder. She was lean, mid-40s, with lines in her face that didn't come from age alone. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her uniform had no insignia, no ribbons, no rank patches, nothing that told you anything about who she was or what she'd done. Her transfer file, which Kane had reviewed the night before with growing irritation, was almost completely blank. Name, date of birth, blood type, and that single line under duty history that told him absolutely nothing useful. Kane had read files like that before. They usually meant one of two things. Either the person had spent 15 years doing absolutely nothing of value, or someone up the chain had buried their record because they'd done something to embarrass the institution. Either way, Kane had zero interest in babysitting. "Reese," he said, not a question, a statement. Elena stopped in front of him. "Yes, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was calm, level. The voice of someone who wasn't performing anything, who was just responding to a simple piece of information with a simple confirmation. "You're late," Kane said. "The bus was late, Sergeant," Elena said. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't ask you to explain yourself," he said. "I told you you're late." Elena looked at him for exactly 1 second. Not long, not defiant, just 1 second, and then she nodded. "Understood," she said. That 1 second bothered Kane more than he would have admitted. Most new arrivals looked away faster than that. They dropped their eyes out of reflex, out of the instinct every soldier develops when a superior gets in their face. This woman had not dropped her eyes out of defiance either. She had simply looked at him the way you look at something you've already figured out and decided isn't worth much more of your attention. Kane did not like that at all. "Ma'am," he said, and he loaded the word with just enough edge to make it clear he didn't mean it with respect. "You sure you got off at the right base? Support administration is the next facility over, about 12 miles east. Easy mistake to make." "This is my assignment, Sergeant," Elena said. Kane looked at her for another moment. Then he looked down at the clipboard in his hand, flipped through 2 pages like he was searching for something he knew wasn't there, and looked back at her. "Fall in with the others," he said, "and know this. On my base, late means you already owe me." Elena nodded once, shifted her duffel bag, and walked toward the formation without another word. 30 yards away, standing third from the left in the third row of soldiers already assembled for morning briefing, Corporal Garrett Walsh was watching. Walsh was 26 years old, 2 years into his first real posting, and he had learned very quickly at Pine Valley that the best way to survive was to notice everything and say nothing. He had sharp eyes, the kind that picked up details other people missed, the kind that had kept him alive in situations where being half a second slower would have meant going home in a box. He had watched Kane's interaction with the new arrival from the corner of his eye. He had noticed the 1 second. He had noticed that Kane was still watching Reese, even after she had already turned away, the way a dog watches something it can't quite figure out how to chase. Walsh filed that away and said nothing. The morning formation briefing was conducted by Major Owen Briggs, the base's executive officer. Briggs was everything Kane was, except with college credentials and a louder voice. He was the kind of officer who had learned to perform authority rather than carry it. His chin was always up, his uniform was always perfect, and he had a particular habit, which every soldier on the base had noticed within their first week, of targeting whoever in the room seemed least able to fight back. It took Briggs approximately 4 minutes to find Elena Reese. He walked the line during inspection, stopping at each soldier, checking their posture, their uniform, their expression. When he reached Elena at the end of the row, he stopped and stared for a long moment. "What is your name?" Briggs said. Not a question, a demand. "Reese, sir," Elena said. "Elena Reese. Where are you from, Reese?" "Fort Carson originally, sir. Most recently, a support position outside of—" "I didn't ask for your biography," Briggs cut her off. He looked her up and down slowly, making sure the recruits on either side of her were paying attention to what he was about to say. "How old are you?" he asked. 44, sir." Briggs made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He turned slightly to look at the soldiers flanking Elena, performing for an audience. 44, he repeated. "You know what, Reese? I've got equipment on this base older than you, and it works harder." A few recruits smiled. Not laughter yet, just the cautious smile of people who had learned that laughing at the Major's jokes was safer than not laughing. Briggs stepped closer. "You show up on my base looking like somebody's HR supervisor who took a wrong turn," he said. "No record I can see, no rank, no ribbons, no reason I can identify for you being here." He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough that it became more dangerous rather than less. "And you think I'm just going to fold you into my operation like that's normal?" "I'm here to serve, sir," Elena said. "You're here because someone sent you here, and I don't know why yet," Briggs said. "That makes you a question mark, and I don't like question marks on my base." He straightened up. "You'll bunk in Section D," he said. "You'll report to Sergeant Kane's unit, and you will earn your place here the same as everyone else. Starting with the morning run, 6 miles, full pack. You've got 45 minutes. The soldiers around Elena had the standard 30 minutes for the same run. Elena did not point that out. She said, "Yes, sir," and she meant it. That was the first day. The bunk assignment in Section D turned out to be the one closest to the exterior wall, which meant it caught every draft that blew through the gaps in the base's aging structure. Elena discovered this when she arrived at her bunk that evening and found her mattress soaked through with what smelled like dirty mop water. Someone had done it deliberately. There was no pipe overhead, no structural reason for it, just someone's idea of a welcome. She pulled the mattress off the frame, stood it against the wall to dry, and prepared to sleep on the bare springs without saying a word to anyone. Across the room, Garrett Walsh was watching. He watched her assess the situation with the same calm she'd shown at the gate with Kane. Watched her make the practical decision to dry the mattress rather than complain. Watched her take off her jacket, fold it carefully, and lay it across the metal springs to give herself a thin layer of padding between her body and the frame. Then he watched her lie down, close her eyes, and within 3 minutes appear to be completely asleep. That bothered Walsh. Not in the way Kane's targeting had bothered him. This was different. This was the kind of detail that told you something about a person that they weren't saying out loud. The ability to fall asleep that quickly on bare metal in a hostile environment was not something most people had. It was something you developed, something you trained yourself to do when sleep was a tactical resource, and you took it when you could get it, because you never knew when the next chance would come. Walsh had seen that kind of sleep before, in people who'd been deployed, in people who'd operated in places where comfort was a luxury you couldn't afford. He looked at the woman on the bare springs one more time, then rolled over in his own bunk and said nothing to anyone. On the second day, the kitchen situation started. Pine Valley had a central mess hall that operated on a simple system. Soldiers went through the line, got their meal, sat down, ate. It wasn't complicated, but when Elena went through the line on the morning of her second day, the private working the serving station looked at her, looked down at a paper he had on the counter, and then served her a plate with cold scrambled eggs and a single piece of toast. The soldier ahead of Elena had received a full hot breakfast. Elena looked at the plate. She looked at the private. The private looked back at her without expression. Elena took the plate, said, "Thank you," and sat down at the far end of the last table. Sergeant Kane was watching from the doorway. He smiled. During the obstacle course that afternoon, an instructor named Davis ran Elena through the course 3 separate times, while the rest of the unit ran it once. On Elena's third run, Davis told her the course record was 7 minutes and 40 seconds, and then looked at his stopwatch afterward and said Elena had run it in 9 minutes. 2 other soldiers standing nearby were quietly certain they had watched Elena finishing closer to 7 flat. Elena said nothing. She wrote nothing down. She just nodded and moved to the next station. It was at the firing range that Corporal Walsh first saw something he could not explain away. The rifles were already set up at the stations when the unit arrived. Walsh was 3 stations to Elena's left and slightly behind her, which meant he had a clear line of sight when she picked up the weapon and immediately set it back down. She hadn't even raised it to check the sight picture. She had picked it up, held it for maybe 2 seconds, and put it back down. Then she disassembled it. Not slowly, not the way someone works through a process they've memorized step by step. She disassembled the rifle the way you unbuckle a belt, automatically, without thinking, her hands doing something her mind was barely supervising. She looked down at the components laid out in front of her, picked up the bolt carrier group, examined it for half a second, and put the rifle back together. Then she raised it, fired her qualification string, and set it down. The shots had been quiet, grouped tight, steady, unhurried, like a metronome. Walsh, the range officer, nodded. Kane walked to the line and announced that Reese had experienced a weapon malfunction and her score would not be recorded. Walsh had watched Elena reassemble that rifle. There had been no malfunction. That night in the barracks, Walsh sat on the edge of his bunk and thought about all of it. The mattress, the food, the obstacle course times, the firing range. He thought about the way Elena Reese moved and spoke and responded to everything that was being done to her. He thought about that blank file. He had been around enough people in the military to know that there were two kinds of people who said almost nothing. People who had nothing to say, and people who had already said everything that needed saying and were done repeating themselves. He could not figure out which one Elena Reese was. What he did know was that Kane and Briggs were escalating. And escalation, in his experience, only went two directions. Either the target broke or something else broke first. On the morning of the third day, Sergeant Kane gathered the entire unit in the central training yard for what he called a discipline demonstration. He did not explain what that meant when he announced it. He just told everyone to be in formation at 0800, full dress, and to be prepared to observe. Elena was standing at the end of the fourth row when it started. Kane walked to the center of the yard, carrying a folding metal chair and a set of electric clippers. He set the chair down. He held up the clippers, and then he looked directly at Elena Reese and said, loud enough for the entire formation to hear, "Reese, front and center." 200 pairs of eyes shifted. Elena stepped out of the formation and walked to the center of the yard. She did not look surprised. She did not look afraid. She walked with the same unhurried deliberateness she had walked with every moment since she had stepped off that bus 3 days ago. She stopped in front of Kane. "Sit down," Kane said, gesturing to the chair. Elena sat. Kane held up the clippers and looked out at the formation. He was building something here, using the silence the way a performer uses a stage. "On this base," he said, raising his voice so every corner of the yard could hear, "there is no room for passengers, no room for dead weight, no room for people who can't explain why they're here." He looked down at Elena. "You've been here 3 days," he said. "You've contributed nothing. Your record says nothing. You've given me no reason to take you seriously." He clicked the clippers on. The sound ran across the yard like a small motor starting. "So I'm going to help you understand something about this place," Kane said. "About how this works. About what it means to belong here." He put the clippers to Elena's head. And Elena sat completely still, not rigid, not clenched, still the way a mountain is still, not because it has given up, but because it does not need to move. The hair came off in strips, shoulder-length hair, dark with touches of gray, falling into the gravel around the chair. The yard, all 200 soldiers of it, watched. Some of them laughed. Some of them looked away. Some, like Walsh, could not stop watching Elena's face. Because Elena Reese was doing something that made no sense to any of them. She was watching Kane. Not with hatred, not with humiliation, with the careful, patient attention of someone who was collecting information. Her eyes tracked every movement Kane made, every word he said, the angle of his body, the direction of his gaze when he worked the clippers, the way he played to the formation. Every detail Elena Reese was cataloging, filing away, storing. When it was done, Kane stepped back and looked at his work with visible satisfaction. The yard erupted in the low murmur of 200 people reacting to something they had all just witnessed together. Elena reached up and ran one hand across her bare scalp once, just to feel it. Then she looked up at Kane and said, quietly enough that only the man directly in front of her could hear, "Are we done here, Sergeant?" Kane blinked. Whatever reaction he had been expecting, that was not it. "Get back in formation," he said. Elena stood from the chair, straightened her uniform, and walked back to her position in the fourth row. Walsh watched her slot back into place like a woman returning to a bench in a park. The murmuring around her died down slowly. The formation was dismissed. And as the soldiers broke apart and moved toward their next assignment, Walsh found himself walking near Elena, not entirely by accident. He did not say anything at first, just walked alongside her for a few steps. Then, quietly, not looking at her, he said, "That was a Code 3 violation. What he just did, that's not legal discipline." Elena said nothing. "I'm just saying," Walsh continued, "someone should know about it." Elena walked 3 more steps before she responded. "Someone does," she said. That was all. She split off toward the Section D barracks, and Walsh stopped walking and stood still for a moment in the middle of the yard, watching her go. Someone does. Walsh could not shake those 2 words for the rest of the day. They sat in his mind like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading out in ways he couldn't quite track. Said without edge, without bitterness, without the kind of quiet satisfaction of someone planning revenge. Just a simple statement of fact, as matter-of-fact as breathing. He replayed the firing range in his mind, the way Elena had disassembled that rifle without hesitation, the way you don't have to think about something you've done 10,000 times. He replayed the obstacle course times, the way the instructor had looked at his stopwatch and lied about what it said, and the way Elena had just nodded and moved on. He thought about the mattress, soaked and ruined, and the image of Elena Reese adjusting her jacket over bare metal springs and closing her eyes like a woman lying down in her own bed. He thought about the blank file. And then he thought about something one of his old training officers back at Fort Benning had told him once. Something that had seemed like a riddle when he first heard it. His old officer had said, "The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody can find anything on. Because it doesn't mean they haven't done anything. It means someone decided what they've done is too sensitive to leave where people like you can see it." Walsh had been 22 when he heard that. He had filed it away as wisdom for later. Standing in that training yard with Elena Reese's words still hanging in the cold morning air, Walsh thought that later might have finally arrived. He turned and walked to his next assignment. Inside Section D, in the barracks everyone else avoided because of the drafts and the smell and the bad springs, Elena Reese sat on the edge of her stripped bunk. She reached into the inner pocket of her duffel bag and took out a small, simple notebook. The kind you could buy at any gas station. The kind nobody looks twice at. She opened it to a page that already had writing on it. She took a pen from the same pocket. She added 4 lines in handwriting that was small and precise. Day 3. Unauthorized physical alteration of personnel without consent or command authorization. Gender-based intimidation component present. Conducted in full view of unit, witnessed by approximately 200 personnel. She closed the notebook, put it back in the pocket, zipped the bag closed. Then she lay back on the bare metal springs, folded her hands on her chest, and stared at the ceiling. Outside the barracks, she could still hear the bass running, orders being called, boots on gravel. A world that had decided in 3 days exactly what it thought she was. She let them think it. She had learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you could do in enemy territory, and that was exactly what she had to treat this as, enemy territory, was to make sure they underestimated you completely. You wanted them comfortable. You wanted them confident. You wanted them pushing harder and harder, being louder and louder, making more and more decisions they could not walk back. Because every decision they could not walk back was a brick in the case she was building. She thought about her daughter for a moment. Maya, 12 years old, staying with her uncle while Elena was here. She had called her the night before the transfer. She had told her she was going somewhere for work for a little while. Maya had asked how long. Elena had said she wasn't sure. A week, maybe. Maybe a little more. Maya had said, "Be careful, Mom." Elena had said, "Always, sweetheart." She was going to be careful. She was going to be very careful. She stared at the ceiling of Section D barracks and listened to Pine Valley Military Training Base operating around her. And she thought, 3 days. They've given me everything I need in 3 days. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The fourth day started the same way the first three had. Cold, loud, and deliberate. Sergeant Victor Kane had a gift for cruelty that was almost architectural. He did not just make things hard. He designed the hardness with a specific purpose, stacking one pressure on top of another the way you stack stones to build a wall. Each one chosen to rest on the weakness of the one beneath it. And after 3 days of watching Elena Reese absorb everything without visible damage, Kane had decided that what was required was not more of the same. What was required was something that would get inside her head, because everything they had done to her body had clearly failed to touch whatever was operating underneath it. So on the morning of day 4, Kane changed his approach. He waited until the unit was assembled for the morning run, and then he called out 4 names: Callahan, Hutchinson, Patterson, and the specialist named Webster, who had been at Pine Valley for 6 weeks and had spent most of that time trying to make an impression on anyone who would notice. He pulled the 4 of them aside while the rest of the unit stretched and waited, and he spoke to them quietly. Nobody heard what he said, but when those 4 fell back into formation, they were positioned directly behind Elena Reese, and the looks on their faces had changed. Corporal Walsh noticed. He always noticed. The run started at 0600, 6 miles on the outer loop that circled the base perimeter. Cold air, hard ground, the kind of morning that tasted like metal in the back of your throat. Elena ran at the back of the pack the way she always did, not because she could not keep up. Walsh had quietly clocked her on the second morning and realized she was deliberately holding herself to the group's pace, but because she seemed to have no interest in being noticed. Callahan moved up beside her at the first mile marker. Patterson and Hutchinson closed in on the other side. Webster dropped back to cut off the angle behind her. It was not subtle. It was not meant to be subtle. It was a box. 4 men making a box around a fifth. And what happened inside a box on a 6-mile perimeter run depended entirely on what those 4 men decided to do. What they decided to do, starting at mile 2, was make it impossible to breathe. Callahan kept drifting left into Elena's lane without quite making contact. Hutchinson on the right side mirrored him. It created a narrowing corridor that forced Elena to either slow down or push into one of them. If she pushed, it would look like she had started something. Kane was running 30 yards ahead at the front of the pack, far enough away for plausible deniability, close enough to watch in his peripheral vision. Elena slowed fractionally. The corridor slowed with her. Then Patterson, running just ahead and to the left, suddenly and without visible reason, changed his stride pattern and kicked back. Not hard, not obvious, but his left heel caught Elena's right shin hard enough to make her stumble. Elena went down. Not badly, one knee to the gravel, one hand out to catch herself. She was back up in under 2 seconds, but the stumble was public, and 4 men were already pulling ahead, and Callahan called back without looking. "Careful, ma'am. We'd want you getting hurt out here." The pack kept running. Nobody stopped. Walsh had been 10 yards back and had seen the heel come out. He had seen the angle of it. He kept running and said nothing and felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the morning air. When the unit returned from the run, Kane was standing at the gate with a stopwatch and a face like a verdict. "Reese," he called out as Elena came through the gate last. She stopped in front of him. Her knee was bleeding through her pants where she had hit the gravel. She had not mentioned it. 49 minutes, Kane said. "You're 40 seconds over standard. That's 2 demerits and a full kit inspection before mess." Understood, Sergeant, Elena said. Kane looked at her for a long moment, searching for something. Frustration, anger, despair, anything, and found nothing he recognized. Get cleaned up, he said finally, something almost like unease moving behind his eyes. You've got 20 minutes. Elena nodded and walked toward the barracks. Callahan was laughing about something near the water station. Patterson clapped him on the back. Neither of them looked at Elena as she passed. Inside Section D, Elena sat on her bunk and rolled up her pants leg. The knee was scraped raw, a rough patch of broken skin the size of her palm. She cleaned it with water from her canteen and a piece of cloth she tore from an undershirt, pressing firmly, no expression on her face. Then she took out her notebook. She wrote 4 names. She wrote the mile marker. She wrote the approximate time. She wrote 1 sentence describing the heel contact and 1 sentence noting Kane's position relative to the incident and the angle from which he would have been able to observe it. She closed the notebook. She had 20 minutes, and she used 12 of them to eat a handful of crackers from a box she kept in the bottom of her duffel bag, because the mess hall situation had not improved, and she had learned by now not to rely on it. She used the remaining 8 to sit very still with her hands in her lap and think. The situation at Pine Valley was worse than the preliminary reports had suggested. The reports had indicated systematic harassment of lower-ranked personnel, selective application of discipline, and possible falsification of evaluation scores. That was what had been flagged. That was the official basis for the evaluation. What the reports had not captured, because reports never fully captured the human element, was the texture of it, the way it was organized, the way it moved through the chain of command like a well-rehearsed performance. Kane operating as the hands, Briggs providing the cover. The two of them working together with the unconscious coordination of men who had been doing the same thing for a long time and had never been challenged on it. This was not random abuse. This was a system. And systems, in Elena's experience, did not respond to individual incidents being reported up the chain. You could flag one incident and watch the system close around it like water closing over a stone. No trace, no impact, business as usual within a week. What you needed was a complete picture. What you needed was every brick. She was not close to having every brick yet. She put her notebook away, rolled her pants leg back down, and went to stand kit inspection with a bleeding knee and a face that gave Kane absolutely nothing to work with. The inspection lasted 45 minutes and found 3 violations, all of them in areas of her kit that Elena had not touched since arriving, which meant someone had been inside her section while she was on the run. She accepted the violations without comment, wrote them in the notebook that evening with the date and time and the specific items involved, and went to mess. The cold scrambled eggs were back. This time there was no toast. She sat at the end of the last table and ate them. Corporal Garrett Walsh sat down across from her without asking. Elena looked up. You saw it, Walsh said. He was not making a question of it. Which part? Elena asked. The heel, mile 2. Elena looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she picked up her fork again. How's your knee? She said. Walsh blinked. My knee? From the run last week, you landed wrong coming off the cargo net. You've been favoring your left side since Tuesday. Walsh sat back slightly. He had not realized anyone had noticed that. He had not even been thinking about it. It's fine, he said. It's not, Elena said. Then she paused. You changed the subject. I answered your question, Elena said. You want to know if I'm going to do something about it. That's the question. Walsh held her gaze. Are you? He said. Already am, Elena said. She picked up her fork again and went back to the cold eggs like the conversation was finished. Walsh sat there for another moment, not sure what to do with that answer. And then he stood up and took his tray away. Already am. There it was again. Not a promise, not a threat. A statement of existing fact. Something already in motion that Walsh could not see, but that Elena Reese apparently had complete confidence in. Walsh thought about the blank file all the way back to his bunk. Day 5 began with what looked like routine training, but Elena had learned by now that nothing at Pine Valley was routine without a reason. The morning formation was quiet. Kane ran it with the same compressed control he had shown since their conversation at mess. Clipped sentences, no theater. He did not look at Elena once during the entire 30-minute briefing. Walsh noticed the absence of attention the way he noticed everything. It bothered him more than Kane's active targeting had, because absence of attention from someone like Kane usually meant one of two things. Either he had given up, or he was planning something that required patience. Walsh did not think Kane had given up. The day's schedule included live fire exercises in the morning and tactical evaluations in the afternoon. Standard rotation. Nothing unusual on paper. But at the firing range, something shifted. The unit arrived at 0900 to find the range already set up with targets at varying distances. 200 meters, 400, 600. Long-range precision work, the kind that separated people who could shoot from people who could really shoot. The range officer, a lieutenant named Parker, who had been at Pine Valley for 3 years and had never once questioned anything Kane told him to do, walked the line explaining the exercise. 3 shots per distance, Parker said. Timed sequence. You'll have 45 seconds at each station to acquire, adjust, and fire. Scores will be recorded and posted. He paused when he reached Elena's position. Reese, he said, you'll be shooting last, after everyone else has completed the course. Elena said, yes, sir. Walsh, 3 stations down, felt something tighten in his chest. Shooting last meant shooting alone. No crowd to blend into. No context to hide a performance. Whatever Elena did out there would be visible to everyone, and everyone would remember it. The unit moved through the stations. Most soldiers grouped their shots adequately at 200 meters, struggled at 400, and missed entirely at 600. It was exactly what you would expect from a unit that trained for close-quarters combat and urban operations, not long-range precision. Walsh shot competently, not exceptional, but solid. He watched the others do the same, watched them finish and clear the range, and then he watched Elena Reese step up to the firing line alone. Parker handed her the rifle. She took it, checked the chamber, examined the scope with the same automatic efficiency Walsh had seen at the range 3 days ago. Then she settled into position. The 200-meter targets fell in 3 shots, grouped so tight they could have been drawn with a compass. 42 seconds. The 400-meter targets fell the same way. 44 seconds. At 600 meters, where most of the unit had missed entirely, Elena adjusted for wind, adjusted for elevation, and put 3 rounds into a grouping that would have made a competition shooter proud. 46 seconds. She cleared the rifle, set it down, and stepped back from the line. The range had gone absolutely quiet. Parker walked to check the targets with a spotting scope, his face doing something complicated. He wrote numbers on his clipboard, looked at them, looked back at the targets, and wrote them again. When he walked back to the line, Kane was standing beside him. The 2 men spoke quietly for perhaps 20 seconds. Parker's face shifted from surprise to something more careful. He nodded. He crossed something out on his clipboard and wrote something else. "Reese," Parker called out. Elena turned. "Your scores will not be recorded," Parker said. "The rifle you were assigned had a defective scope. The calibration was off. We'll need to retest you tomorrow with different equipment." Elena looked at him for exactly 1 second. "Understood, sir," she said. Walsh stood 15 feet away, and he knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who had watched the entire sequence unfold, that there had been nothing wrong with that scope. He had seen Elena check it. He had seen her adjust for it. He had seen the groupings at 600 meters that you could not produce with defective equipment. This was the same lie as the malfunction 3 days ago. The same pattern. The same erasure of evidence that contradicted the narrative Kane needed to maintain. But this time, Walsh noticed something else. This time, when Elena walked past the range officer and Kane on her way back to the barracks, there was something in Kane's face that had not been there before. Something that looked almost like fear, dressed up as anger. The look of a man who had just watched someone do something they should not have been able to do, and who did not know what to do with that information except make it disappear. That afternoon, Private First Class Dawson Blake made a mistake. It was a simple mistake. He miscounted a supply inventory and reported the wrong number to Sergeant Kane. The kind of error that happens when you are 21 years old and trying to do three things at once, and your attention splits in a direction it should not have. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a correction, a note in a file, a reminder to be more careful. But these were not normal circumstances, and Kane was not looking for correction. He was looking for something to attach to, because the morning session at the range had given him nothing, and a man like Kane needed targets the way other men needed oxygen. It happened in the middle of the equipment yard in front of 40 people. Kane got in Blake's face, and he was loud, and he was specific, and he said things that had nothing to do with the inventory error, and everything to do with the particular pressure points of a 21-year-old who had not yet learned how to stand up straight when the world pushed on him. He said things about Blake's intelligence. He said things about Blake's future on this base. He said things that were designed not to correct a mistake, but to reduce a person. And Blake stood there and took it, and shrank visibly in front of 40 witnesses, his face going through 3 colors in 45 seconds. Elena had been standing 20 feet away, waiting for the equipment she had been assigned to collect. She watched for 30 seconds, then she walked over. "Sergeant," she said. Kane turned. Whatever he had been expecting to happen in the next 30 seconds, it was not this. "Reese, back in line." The inventory error was a miscommunication in the original distribution list, Elena said. She said it clearly, at a volume the 40 people around them could hear. "I was at the table when the list was copied. The column totals were already off before Blake received it. He counted what was there. The number was wrong before he touched it." Kane stared at her. "Back in line, Reese, now." "I'm not trying to create a problem, Sergeant," Elena said. "I'm giving you accurate information about where the error originated so it can be corrected at the source." "I said back in line." "Yes, Sergeant." Elena held her ground for exactly 1 more second, long enough to make sure the people around them had absorbed what she had said. Then she stepped back. Kane turned to Blake, whose face had started to come back to one color. "Dismissed," Kane said. His voice had changed. The performance had a crack in it now, visible to anyone watching closely. He pointed at the supply clerk standing nearby. "Pull the original list," he said. "Verify the column totals." He did not say anything else. He walked away. Blake stood in the equipment yard for a moment, recalibrating. He looked at Elena. He was the kind of young man who cried easily and hated himself for it, and he was very close to the edge of it right now, fighting it hard. "You didn't have to do that," Blake said. "No," Elena agreed. "I didn't." Blake swallowed. "He's going to come after you harder now," he said. "Probably," Elena said. She picked up the equipment that was hers and started walking back towards Section D. She had gone maybe 15 feet when Blake called after her. "Why'd you do it then?" Elena stopped. She considered it for a moment, not performing the consideration, actually doing it. The way a person pulls something up from somewhere real. "Because it was wrong," she said, "and someone who could say something was standing close enough to say it." She kept walking. Behind her, the equipment yard slowly went back to its ordinary sounds. Supplies being moved, voices crossing each other, the business of a base continuing in its grooves. But something had shifted in the air, and the people who had been standing there felt it, even if they could not have named it. Something had happened that did not fit the pattern they had all adjusted themselves to accommodate. A woman with nothing to gain had stepped into a situation with everything to lose and had said the accurate thing at the accurate moment and then walked away. That was not supposed to happen here. That was not what Pine Valley had trained them to expect. That evening, Kane called Elena into his office. The office was small and smelled like old coffee and boot polish. Kane was sitting behind his desk when Elena came in, and he did not offer her a seat, so Elena stood. "Close the door," Kane said. Elena closed it. Kane leaned back in his chair and looked at her. The performance was gone now. The public version of Kane who played to the formations and used clippers for theater. This was the private version, and the private version was quieter and considerably more dangerous. "I'm going to be straight with you, Reese," he said. "I don't know what your angle is. I don't know why you're here with a blank file and no rank and no explanation. And that face you've got that doesn't change no matter what I do to you. And I don't like things I don't understand." Elena stood with her hands at her sides and said nothing. "I've broken harder people than you," Kane said. "People who came in here thinking they were something and left knowing they weren't. It's what I do. It's what this base does." He leaned forward. "But you're not acting like someone who thinks they're something," he said. "You're acting like someone who knows something. And that's a different problem." He let that sit in the air for a moment. "So I'm going to give you one opportunity," he said. "Tell me who you are. Not what's in that file, because I know that file is useless. Tell me who sent you here and what they expect you to find. And maybe we have a different kind of conversation going forward." Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sergeant, is there anything else you need from me this evening?" Kane's jaw tightened. "That's your answer?" he said. "You asked me a question I can't answer, Sergeant. So yes, that's my answer." Kane stood up. He was a big man standing, and he used it, moving to the front of the desk so there was less space between them. "You think this is a game, Reese?" "No, Sergeant. You think because you held it together out there in the yard, because you sat in that chair and let me shave your head in front of the whole base, and you kept your face nice and blank, you think that means something?" "I think it means what you made it mean," Elena said. Kane went very still. "What did you just say?" "You put me in that chair," Elena said, and her voice did not rise, did not harden, did not do anything except stay exactly what it had been from the moment she stepped off the bus. Quiet even, and completely certain of itself. "You ran the exercise. Everything that happened in that yard was your choice, Sergeant, not mine." The two of them stood 3 feet apart in the small office, and the silence was the kind that has weight to it. Kane stepped back. He walked around his desk and sat down again, and picked up a pen from his desk and held it without writing anything. "Get out of my office," he said. Elena turned, opened the door, and walked out. She walked back to Section D in the dark, past the training yard where the chair was still sitting in the same place it had been that morning. She did not look at it. She walked past it without breaking stride, went inside, sat on her bunk, took out her notebook. She wrote about the conversation in Kane's office. She wrote the relevant sections verbatim, as close as her memory allowed, which was very close. She wrote the date and time. Then she sat still for a while and thought about Maya, 12 years old and staying with her uncle, who had said, "Be careful, Mom," and meant it the way children mean things. Completely, without reservation, with the full weight of everything she had. She had 3 more days to complete the evaluation, maybe 4. She was going to finish it. She was going to finish it right. She put the notebook away, lay back on the bare springs, and listened to Pine Valley settle into its night sounds around her. Boots on gravel somewhere in the distance. A door closing. The wind through the gaps in the wall. The ordinary sounds of a place that had no idea what was already in motion inside it. She closed her eyes. Day 6 arrived with complications Elena had not anticipated. In the barracks that morning, Hutchinson approached her at the writing table. He sat down without asking, the way Walsh had done at mess 2 days before. "About the run," he said quietly. "What Patterson did, that was me following a bad order. I know that now." Elena looked at him. "All right," she said. "I don't know what I'm asking," Hutchinson said. "I just thought somebody ought to say it to your face." "You just did," Elena said. Hutchinson nodded slowly and stood. There was something in his eyes that had changed since day 4. Not quite understanding yet, but the beginning of it. The first crack in a foundation he had built without examining what it rested on. The rest of the day passed with a strange quietness. Kane ran training blocks with mechanical precision, but the energy that had driven the first 5 days was absent. He was watching Elena differently now, not with the predatory confidence of someone pursuing a target, but with the wariness of someone who had started to suspect the target might be something else entirely. At evening formation, Walsh caught Elena's eye across the yard and gave her the smallest nod. Just acknowledgement, just the silent communication of someone who had figured out enough to know that what was happening here was larger than what any of them could see. That night, Elena sat at the cold writing table and allowed herself to think about the one piece she still needed: the fiscal records. Briggs ran a discretionary training budget that, according to preliminary intelligence, had expenditure lines that didn't match any documented activity. That was the piece that would elevate this from harassment to criminal corruption. She needed access to the administrative building. She needed Briggs to make one more move. She had told herself Briggs needed pressure from Kane before he would move. She had calculated that the sequence required Kane to feel cornered first, then carry that feeling up the chain, and then Briggs would react from a position of anxiety rather than calculation. That was the sequence. That was what she had been waiting for. What she had not calculated was that Briggs had already been watching on his own, that Briggs had not needed Kane to tell him something was wrong. That Briggs, for all his noise and performance, in the particular vanity of a man who had built his identity entirely on the authority of his rank, was not completely stupid. He was dangerous in the way that mediocre men in positions of real power are always dangerous. Not because they are brilliant, but because they are cornered animals who have learned to strike first. Elena found this out on the morning of day 8, before breakfast, before formation, before the base had fully woken up. She was coming back from the latrine at 05:15 when 2 military police officers stepped out of the shadows on either side of the path between Section D and the central yard. They were not aggressive. They were not loud. They simply stepped into her path, and the one on the left said, "Major Briggs wants to see you, ma'am." Not Reese, not recruit, ma'am. Elena noticed that. She filed it away in the same place she filed everything. That quiet, internal drawer that never got too full because it was organized with a precision most people never saw and would not have believed if they had. She went with them. The administrative building had been off limits to Elena since arrival. Now the MPs led her straight to Briggs's office on the 2nd floor. It was larger than Kane's office, with a desk that was too big for the room and 2 chairs arranged in front of it that were positioned slightly lower than the chair behind the desk. A small architectural choice that told you everything you needed to know about the man who had arranged them. Briggs was standing when Elena came in, which was not what Elena had expected. Men who used furniture as a power statement usually sat behind it when they wanted to project authority. Standing meant something was off the usual script. The MPs stayed outside. The door closed. Briggs looked at Elena for a long moment. His face was doing something complicated, cycling through several things before it settled on something that was trying to look like calm control and was not entirely succeeding. "Sit down, Reese," he said. Elena sat. Briggs did not sit. He walked to the side of the desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms, looking down at Elena from a standing angle. A different kind of height play, less formal, more personal. "I'm going to tell you something," Briggs said, "and I want you to listen to it carefully, because I'm only going to say it once." "Yes, sir," Elena said. "I've been doing this for 19 years, Briggs said. 19 years of managing bases, managing personnel, managing every kind of problem that walks through a gate on a transport bus." He paused. "And I have a sense for people," he continued. "I've always had it. Some officers develop it early. Some never develop it at all. But I've had it since my first posting. And what my sense is telling me about you has been telling me something very loud since approximately day 2. He stopped and looked at Elena carefully, checking for a reaction. Elena gave him the same face she gave everything. Briggs kept going. So I pulled some threads, he said, not through official channels, because official channels would have gone through records that you apparently don't have, which is its own kind of information. He walked slowly along the side of the desk, not taking his eyes off her. But I have contacts, he said, people who owe me conversations, and I made some calls yesterday evening. Elena's body did not change. Her posture, her breathing, her expression, none of it changed. But something sharpened internally, a single degree of alertness, raising itself without any outward evidence. And what I was told, Briggs continued, is that your name does not appear in any standard personnel database, but it does appear in something that requires a clearance level I do not have to access. He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. And the person I spoke to, who does have that clearance level, would not tell me what you are or why you're here. He just said, and I'm quoting him directly, "Reese is not your problem, Owen. Let it go." Briggs uncrossed his arms. He looked at Elena the way a man looks at a situation he has realized too late he does not fully understand. "So I am asking you directly," he said, "not as your commanding officer, not performing anything. Directly, person to person in a room with the door closed." He leaned forward slightly. "What are you doing on my base?" Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she said, quietly and evenly, "Major, I think you already know the answer to that question." Something moved across Briggs's face. It was not quite fear. It was the thing that comes just before fear, the recognition that fear is about to be appropriate. "This is an evaluation," Briggs said. He said it quiet, stripped of all its usual volume. Not a question. A man arriving at a conclusion and saying it out loud to see how it sounds. Elena said nothing. "You've been documenting," Briggs said, "everything since you arrived." Still nothing. Briggs straightened up. He walked behind his desk and sat down. And for once, the big desk and the low chairs were not making him look more powerful. They were making him look smaller. A man using furniture to put distance between himself and something he was not ready to face directly. "How bad is it?" he said. Elena looked at him steadily. "Major, don't give me procedure," Briggs said. His voice had an edge now, but not the performative edge he used in formations. This was something raw underneath. "I'm asking you how bad it is. What you have in that file or that notebook or wherever you're keeping it, how bad?" Elena considered him. Briggs was afraid, genuinely afraid. And Elena had seen enough frightened men in enough difficult situations to know that fear in a man like Briggs could go two directions. It could go toward honesty, the kind of honesty that only surfaces when the game is clearly over, or it could go toward desperation, which was considerably more dangerous. She needed to know which direction this was going. "It's thorough," Elena said. Briggs closed his eyes for 1 second. Just 1 second. Then he opened them. "The training budget discrepancies," he said. "You know about those." It was not a question. "I know there are discrepancies," Elena said carefully. "I haven't been able to access the specific records." Something moved in Briggs's expression. Fast, almost invisible, a calculation happening behind his eyes. He looked at Elena, and then he looked at his desk, and then he looked back at Elena, and Elena watched the calculation complete itself. "What if I gave you access?" Briggs said. The room went very quiet. "To the records," Briggs continued. His voice had taken on a quality Elena recognized, the quality of a man trying to build a transaction, trying to find the structure of a deal in a situation that had not been presented to him as negotiable. "Full access, everything. If I gave you that voluntarily, if I cooperated fully from this point forward, that counts for something in whatever report you're writing." He leaned forward. "Cooperation at this stage," he said, "that changes the calculus. You know it does." Elena looked at him steadily. "Major," she said, "I can't make you any promises about how an evaluation concludes." "I'm not asking for promises," Briggs said. "I'm asking if cooperation factors in." "It factors into everything," Elena said. "It always does." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and took out a key card and a folder and set them both on the desk between them. "File room is down the hall," he said. "Third door on the left." The key card opens it. "The folder has the context you'll need to understand what you're looking at." He paused. "The budget lines in question go back 14 months, he said. "They weren't my idea. Kane came to me with a request, and I signed off on it. And I have been aware for approximately 8 months that I should not have done that." Elena looked at the key card in the folder. She looked at Briggs. "Why are you doing this?" Elena said. It was the first time she had asked a question in that office that was genuinely a question. Not a response strategy or a calibration check, but an actual human curiosity about what was happening in another person. Briggs looked at the desk. "I've got a daughter," he said. "Rebecca, 22. She just got her commission last spring." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't want her to serve in a place like this," he said. "I don't want anyone's kid to serve in a place like this." He looked up. "I should have said that to myself 14 months ago," he said. "I didn't. I'm saying it now." Elena picked up the key card. She picked up the folder. She stood. "Thank you, Major," she said. Briggs nodded. He looked older than he had 5 minutes ago, which was sometimes what honesty did to a person. Elena went to the file room. She was in there for 40 minutes. She did not rush. She worked through the budget documents methodically, the way she worked through everything, photographing the relevant pages with a small device that looked like a pen and that no one had thought to search for because no one had searched her at all when she arrived. Because the gap in her file had made her look like someone who could not possibly have access to anything worth finding. The discrepancies were exactly what the preliminary intelligence had suggested, and in some places worse. 14 months of budget lines attributed to equipment maintenance and training material procurement that did not correspond to any equipment or materials on the base's inventory. The money had not disappeared completely. That was the thing about men like Kane. They were not sophisticated enough to make money truly disappear. It had simply moved somewhere that required only 2 signatures to reach. And both of those signatures belonged to people who worked at Pine Valley. She photographed everything she needed. She returned the key card to Briggs's office, leaving it on the desk without a word, because Briggs was not in the room, and she walked back to Section D under the pale morning sky. She sat on her bunk. She took out her notebook. She wrote for 12 minutes. Complete sentences, precise language, the specific document numbers and the nature of the discrepancies, and the 2 names on the signatures. She wrote the time of her conversation with Briggs and the key statements Briggs had made as close to verbatim as her memory allowed, which was very close. Then she closed the notebook and sat still. She had everything, every brick. She thought about what Briggs had said about his daughter, 22, just commissioned. Briggs had said it the way a man says the thing he should have been saying all along, the thing that had been sitting in him, waiting for the right pressure to release it. Elena did not have contempt for that. She had seen it too many times in too many different kinds of people to have contempt for it. The moment when the thing a person already knows finally becomes the thing they can say out loud. She had a daughter too, Maya, 12 years old in Maryland, staying with her brother, who had said, "Be careful, Mom," and meant all of it. She thought about her for a moment, deliberately, the way she sometimes allowed herself to think about Maya during operations as a kind of calibration, to remind herself what the work was for, not for the report, not for the institution, for the people the institution was supposed to protect. The young ones who would come to places like this and either be shaped into something good or ground down by something that had decided their value before they walked in the gate. Maya would be grown someday. Maya might find herself in a uniform someday. Elena was not going to let places like Pine Valley be waiting for her. She stood up. She put on her uniform and went to morning formation like it was any other day, because for the next 18 hours it needed to look like any other day. Corporal Walsh was in his usual position in the third row when Elena took her place at the end of the fourth. The morning briefing was conducted by an instructor named Davis, in Kane's absence. Kane was apparently in a meeting with Briggs that had been called at short notice and had not yet ended. Walsh noticed the absence and filed it. He noticed Elena notice it and filed that differently. At the mid-morning break, Walsh fell into step beside Elena near the water station. "Kane's been in with Briggs since 0600, Walsh said quietly, not looking at her. "I know," Elena said. "Something changed this morning," Walsh said. "The whole base feels different, like the air before a storm." He paused. "That you're doing?" Elena drank her water. She did not confirm or deny, but she did not deflect either, which was its own kind of answer. "Tomorrow," Elena said, "be in formation on time. Full dress. Don't be anywhere unusual." Walsh stopped walking. "What happens tomorrow?" he said. Elena looked at him. "Something that should have happened a long time ago," she said. She walked away. Walsh stood at the water station and watched her go, and felt something that he would later describe, when he tried to put it into words, as the particular feeling of standing at the edge of something large, without being able to see the bottom of it. The afternoon session was uneventful in ways that felt deliberate. Kane had emerged from his meeting with Briggs at around 1100 and had run the afternoon training block with a quietness that was entirely unlike him. A compressed, controlled quietness that every soldier on the base could feel like a change in air pressure. He gave no direct orders to Elena. He did not position the 4 men near her during the afternoon run. He stayed on the other side of every room Elena entered, and he did not make eye contact once. Callahan noticed this. Callahan was not perceptive in the ways that mattered most, but he was extremely perceptive about the hierarchy he lived inside, about who was up and who was down, and what direction the current was running. He had spent 6 weeks aligning himself with Kane's axis of power, and when that axis went quiet without explanation, Callahan felt it in his bones. After the afternoon session, Callahan did something that surprised everyone who saw it, though almost no one understood it at the time. He walked up to Elena in the equipment yard while Elena was returning gear, and he stood in front of her, and he said without preamble, without any of his usual performance, "You're not what you said you were." Elena looked at him. "What did I say I was?" she asked. Callahan thought about it. "Nothing," he said. "You never said anything." He was working through something out loud, thinking in front of another person, which for Callahan was a significant and slightly uncomfortable departure from his normal mode of operation. "But we all assumed," he said. "I assumed." "People usually do," Elena agreed. "I put you in a box," Callahan said, "and I ran with Kane's version of you because it was easier." He said it flatly, not asking for absolution, just stating what had happened. "I want you to know I know that," he said. Elena looked at him for a moment. "You've got good instincts, Callahan," she said. "You use them wrong here. That's fixable." Callahan looked at her with an expression that was hard to categorize. Not quite gratitude, not quite relief. Something in between that did not have a clean name. He nodded once and walked away. Private Blake had watched the whole exchange from 10 feet away. He was getting good at watching things without appearing to, a skill this base had taught him involuntarily. He waited until Callahan was gone, and then he stepped up next to Elena. "How do you do that?" Blake said. "Do what?" Elena said. "Talk to people and make them feel like they said something important," Blake said, even when they were basically just admitting they were wrong. Elena looked at him sideways, and the edge of something almost like amusement moved across her face. The first time in 8 days that anything on her face had moved like that. "Being wrong and saying it is important," she said. "More people should do it." Blake thought about that. Is that something they teach in? He stopped. He had been about to say something and thought better of it. He looked at Elena carefully. You're not really a transfer, are you? Elena looked at him for one steady second. Blake, she said, get some sleep tonight. She handed in her last piece of equipment and walked towards Section D. That night, Elena sat in the dark on her bare metal springs and listened to the bass settling into its night sounds. The last night it would sound this way. The last night everything on it would be arranged as it currently was. She thought about the chair in the middle of the training yard, the clippers, the hair falling into the gravel while 200 people watched. She thought about Kane's face while he did it, the satisfaction of a man performing power in front of an audience. The absolute certainty that the woman in the chair was what she appeared to be. What they don't know will end them. That was the oldest truth in her line of work, and it never stopped being true. She lay down. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow at 0900, a vehicle would come through the gate at Pine Valley, and everything that had been built up over 8 days of cold food and flooded mattresses and bare springs and clippers in the morning yard would finally have somewhere to land. She let herself feel for just a moment the particular quiet satisfaction of a woman who has done a hard thing well. Then she let it go. She needed to sleep. Tomorrow was going to require her to be completely, precisely, and entirely awake. The morning of day 9 came in gray and cold, the kind of morning that felt like it was holding its breath. Elena was dressed and sitting on the edge of her bunk at 0500. She did not review her notebook. She did not need to. Everything in it was already in her, organized and ready, the way a speech is ready when you have lived inside it long enough that the words are no longer separate from the person saying them. She went to morning formation at 0600 and stood in her usual place at the end of the 4th row. Kane ran the briefing. He was controlled in a way that was visibly effortful, a man holding something in with both hands. Every sentence clipped and functional. None of the theater that had defined every morning of the previous 8 days. He did not look at Elena once. Not once in the entire 30-minute briefing. Walsh was in his position in the 3rd row, full dress, exactly where Elena had told him to be. He did not look at Elena either, but there was a quality to his stillness that was different from the usual stillness of a man waiting for orders. He was paying attention to everything, cataloging the way Elena had been cataloging all week, feeling the compressed quality of the morning, the way you feel the pressure drop before a storm breaks. At 0830, Kane dismissed the unit to their first training block. At 0847, a sound cut through the bass that everyone recognized. The particular engine sound of a military convoy vehicle moving fast on the access road. The kind of speed that was not standard arrival protocol. The kind of speed that said someone had somewhere to be and was not willing to wait. The vehicle came through the main gate at 0850 and rolled to a stop in the central yard. The door opened. General Arthur Whitaker stepped out. He was 61 years old and had the bearing of a man who had earned every year of it, who carried his rank not in the insignia on his uniform, but in the way he occupied space, in the way the ground under him seemed to take his weight differently than it took anyone else's. 2 aides followed him out, a captain with a tablet, a senior MP with a face like a closed door. The base reacted immediately. Word moved the way word always moves on a closed installation. Fast, directional, impossible to stop once it started. Within 4 minutes of the vehicle coming through the gate, every soldier at Pine Valley who was not in a secured training room knew that General Whitaker had arrived unannounced and was standing in the central yard, including Sergeant Kane. Kane came out of the equipment building at a pace that was trying to look like a walk and was failing. Beside him, Major Briggs appeared from the administrative building, and the 2 men converged in the yard from different directions, reaching Whitaker almost simultaneously and straightening into their best postures and saluting. Whitaker returned the salute without warmth. "Major, Sergeant," his voice was flat. "Where is your full unit?" he said. Briggs said, "Morning training block, sir. We can assemble them in "Do it now," Whitaker said. "Full formation, central yard, 5 minutes." Briggs and Kane exchanged a look that lasted less than a second and contained everything. "Yes, sir," Briggs said. The assembly call went out. Soldiers came in from every corner of the base, falling into formation with the particular urgency that an unannounced general's visit produced. Within 4 minutes, the central yard held the full unit, 216 personnel in dress formation, standing in the gray morning with their breath coming out in small clouds. Elena took her position at the end of the fourth row. She looked straight ahead. Whitaker walked the formation slowly, the way a man walks when he is looking for something specific. His eyes moved along the rows with a methodical precision, passing faces, passing insignia, reading the whole picture the way an experienced commander reads a formation. Not person by person, but as a collective thing. A thing that tells you everything about the culture that produced it, if you know what you are looking at. He stopped. He had reached the end of the fourth row. He was looking at Elena. Elena met his eyes. Whitaker looked at the shaved head. He looked at the torn edge of the utility uniform that had been repaired with the wrong thread color because it was the only thread Elena had. He looked at the scrape on her forearm that had healed badly, the skin still raised and red. He looked at all of it for a long 3 seconds. Then he turned. He turned to face Kane and Briggs, who were standing 20 feet behind him, and his face had changed. Whatever the professional, controlled expression had been, it was gone. What replaced it was something that the 216 soldiers in that formation would remember for the rest of their careers. Something that they would describe to people years later and still not have quite the right words for. It was not anger exactly, though anger was in it. It was the expression of a man who had seen something that should not exist and was deciding in real time what it required of him. "You," he was pointing at Kane. His voice had not gone loud. It had gone the opposite direction. Lower, quieter, more deliberate. The way a serious thing sounds when the person saying it knows they only need to say it once. "What is the condition of this woman's uniform?" Kane looked at Elena. He looked back at Whitaker. "Sir, this personnel arrived on a transfer with—" "I did not ask about the transfer," Whitaker said. "I asked about the condition of her uniform." He looked at Briggs. "And I want to know who authorized the physical alteration of this personnel without rank justification," he said. Briggs opened his mouth, closed it. Whitaker turned back to the formation and held out his hand toward his aide. The captain stepped forward and placed a tablet in it. Whitaker looked at the screen for a moment, then looked up. And what he said next, he said to the entire formation, because he was not interested in saying it quietly. "Bring me this woman's file," he said. Kane said, "Sir, the file is limited. There's very little—" "I have the file," Whitaker said. He held up the tablet. "I have the complete file," he said. "The complete file, Sergeant. Not the version that was left for you to look at." The yard went silent in a way that was different from ordinary silence. It was the silence of 200 people who had just felt the ground shift under them and had not yet decided how to stand. Whitaker walked toward Elena. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. He looked at her directly, and what passed between them in that look was not performed for the formation. It was two people who knew exactly what had happened on this base for 9 days, acknowledging each other across the space of it. "Colonel," Whitaker said quietly. Just that word, and then he saluted. A 4-star general, standing in the middle of the central yard of Pine Valley Military Training Base, saluted the woman at the end of the 4th row. The formation did not move. It could not move. It was collectively doing what individual human beings do when reality rearranges itself faster than comprehension can follow. It stood absolutely still and tried to catch up. Kane made a sound. Not a word, a sound. The kind that comes out of a person when their body registers something before their mind can process it. Elena returned the salute. Then she dropped her hand and turned toward the formation. And 215 people looked at her, and the 215th Corporal Walsh, looked at her the way a man looks at something he had known was coming and had still not been entirely prepared for. Whitaker stepped to Elena's side and addressed the formation. "My name is General Arthur Whitaker," he said. "I oversee training operations for this region. 9 days ago, Colonel Elena Reese volunteered to enter this base undercover as an unranked transfer to conduct an internal evaluation of command culture and training protocols." He paused. "Let that land. In those 9 days," he continued, "she has been subjected to unauthorized physical alteration of her person, falsification of evaluation scores, targeted harassment coordinated through the chain of command, isolation tactics, deliberate deprivation of standard rations, coercion of lower-ranked personnel to participate in hostile actions against her, and gender-based intimidation." He looked at the formation. "All of it documented," he said. "All of it witnessed. All of it in a report that is now in my possession." He turned to Kane. "Sergeant Victor Kane," he said, "you are relieved of command effective immediately. You will surrender your credentials to Captain Morris. You are restricted to your quarters pending a formal investigation, the results of which will be referred to the Judge Advocate General's office." Kane's face had gone white. Not pale, white. The color of something from which all the blood has been removed at once. "Sir," Kane started. "That is not a conversation, Sergeant," Whitaker said. The senior MP moved forward. He did not need to do anything dramatic. He simply moved to stand beside Kane. And Kane, who had spent 11 years using proximity and size to make people feel small, suddenly understood what it felt like to have that physics reversed. Whitaker looked at Briggs. Briggs was already standing differently. He had been standing differently since the word colonel had come out of Whitaker's mouth. His posture subtly reduced. A man making himself smaller in real time. "Major Briggs," Whitaker said, "you will be the subject of a separate proceeding that includes, but is not limited to, the 14-month budget irregularities in your discretionary training account. Your voluntary cooperation, which Colonel Reese has noted in her report, will be taken into consideration, but it will not eliminate the proceeding. Is that understood?" Briggs said, "Yes, sir." His voice was steady. The voice of a man who had known this was coming and had chosen, at the last available moment, to meet it standing up. "You will remain on base pending that process," Whitaker said, "restricted to administrative duties." He turned back to the formation. "The rest of you," he said, and his voice shifted, lost the judicial quality, and became something more direct, more human, "have been serving under a command structure that failed you. Some of you participated in what happened here because you were ordered to. Some of you stood by because you did not know what else to do. And some of you," his eyes moved briefly to Walsh, to Hutchinson, to Blake, to Callahan, "showed the kind of character that this institution is supposed to be building," he said. He let that sit. "Pine Valley is not closing," he said. "It is not being disbanded. It is being rebuilt under new command, with standards that reflect what this uniform is actually supposed to mean. You will all be evaluated individually. Those evaluations will be fair. That is a promise I am making to you in front of a witness who has spent 9 days establishing, beyond any doubt, that she holds people to what they say." No one laughed. No one even breathed loudly. Whitaker turned to Elena. "Colonel Reese," he said, "the base is yours." Elena stepped forward. She stood in front of 215 people in a torn uniform, with a shaved head and a healing arm, and the quiet face that had given nothing away for 9 days. And she looked at them for a long moment before she spoke. "I'm not going to talk to you about what happened on this base," she said. Her voice carried the yard without effort. Not because she was projecting it, but because the yard was so completely silent that even a quiet voice reached every corner of it. "You were here," she said. "You know what happened. What I want to talk about is what comes next." She looked across the rows. "Every one of you came here for a reason," she said. "You put on this uniform for a reason. And somewhere between getting off a bus and standing in this yard today, some of you lost track of that reason. She paused. That's not a condemnation, she said. That is what happens when a place is run by people who use fear as a management tool. Because fear is efficient, and it works fast, and it erodes everything worth having before you notice it's gone. Another pause. I sat in a chair in this yard and let a man shave my head in front of all of you, she said. I didn't stop it. I want to tell you why. She looked at the formation steadily. Because that moment, that exact moment, was the moment that told me everything I needed to know about this command, she said. Not just about the man holding the clippers, about the culture he had built. A culture where that was possible, where 200 people watched and no one said, stop. She let that land. Some of you wanted to say it, she said. I saw your faces. You wanted to say something, and you looked around at the people next to you, and you made a calculation, and the calculation came out wrong, and you stayed quiet. The formation was not moving. That calculation, Elena said, is the thing we are going to spend the next phase of this base's existence dismantling. Because the military does not need people who know how to follow orders when it is easy. It needs people who know what to do when following an order is wrong. She paused. That distinction is the difference between a soldier and a weapon, she said. And I have never, in 22 years of service, been interested in building weapons. She stepped back. Dismissed to barracks, she said. Evaluation scheduling begins at 1400. The formation broke. It broke quietly, without the usual low noise of 200 people simultaneously released from attention. People moved in the reduced, careful way of those who are processing something large and have not yet found the edges of it. Walsh was one of the last to move. He stood in his position in the third row for a moment after the people on either side of him had already started walking away, and he looked at Elena across the emptying yard, and Elena looked back at him. Walsh gave a small nod, the kind that does not need words attached to it. Elena returned it. After the formation dispersed, Whitaker approached Elena near the equipment building. Away from the crowd, his bearings softened slightly. Not unprofessional, just human. 22 years, he said. You've been doing this kind of work for how long? 6 years in investigations, sir. 16 before that in combat engineering. Whitaker nodded. General Sutton spoke highly of you. Said you were the only person he'd trust with something this delicate. He paused. He was right. Thank you, sir. The rebuild here will take time, Whitaker said. But what you documented gives us everything we need to make it stick. Kane won't wear a uniform again. Briggs, he shook his head. We'll see, but the cooperation helps. He made the right choice in the end, sir. Because you gave him the option to, Whitaker said. Not everyone would have. He looked across the yard, at the chair still sitting in the gravel. I'll have that removed before you leave. No need, sir, Elena said. Let the new commander decide what to do with it. It's their base now. Whitaker studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good hunting, Colonel, wherever they send you next. Thank you, sir. He saluted. She returned it. And then he walked back to his convoy, leaving Pine Valley in her hands for the next 48 hours. Private Blake found Elena near the entrance to Section D an hour later. He was not looking for a conversation exactly. He was just there, in the way of someone who needed to be near the thing that had just happened, without quite knowing what to do with that need. Ma'am, he said. The word came out differently than it had come out of anyone's mouth all week. Not performed, just true. Blake, Elena said. I didn't know, Blake said. Obviously, but I want you to know that even if I had known, what you did in the equipment yard, that would have meant the same thing. He stopped. Elena looked at him. Good, she said. That's the right thing for it to mean. Blake nodded and walked away. And there was something different in how he walked, something that had straightened. Not in the posture performance way that Briggs had tried to build through pressure, but in the way something straightens when it finds a foundation under it. Walsh found her 10 minutes later near the equipment yard. He didn't salute, She wasn't in command mode anymore. He just stood there for a moment, then said, "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" "Always, Walsh." "I knew something was wrong here," he said. "I saw it, but I didn't know what to do with what I saw until I watched you." He paused. "Thank you for showing us what right looks like." Elena looked at him steadily. "You already knew, Walsh. You just needed to see someone act on it. Don't forget that." He nodded once. Then he walked away, shoulders straighter than they'd been 9 days ago. Kane was escorted off the base at 1300. Elena watched it from the window of Section D, not with satisfaction, not with anything that wanted to be called revenge, just with the steady attention she had given everything. The attention of a woman who believes that the accurate witnessing of a thing is itself a kind of justice. Callahan walked past Kane on the way out and did not look at him, which was its own kind of statement. Hutchinson did look. He looked directly. And what was in his face was something that Kane, in 11 years of building and using fear, had probably never seen directed at him. Not hatred, not triumph, but the clear and simple look of a young soldier who had figured out the difference between following orders and following a leader, and had decided he was only interested in the latter from this point forward. That afternoon, Elena sat alone in the briefing room with a phone and made the call she had been holding back for 9 days. It rang twice. "Hello?" Maya's voice was the same voice it always was, bright and slightly impatient. The voice of a child who has been waiting for something and is trying to seem like she has not been. "Hey, sweetheart," Elena said. "Mom!" And the impatience dropped immediately, replaced by something pure and uncomplicated. "Are you done?" Maya said. "Are you coming home?" "I'm done," Elena said. "I'm coming home." "Was it bad?" Maya asked. The question was simple. She was 12, but she had been raised by a woman who told her the truth. And she asked questions the way people ask them when they expect real answers. Elena thought about the chair in the yard, the clippers, the cold eggs and the bare springs in the flooded mattress, and Kane's face, performing power in front of an audience of people he had trained to be afraid. She thought about Blake's face in the equipment yard, and Hutchinson looking directly at the man being escorted out, and Walsh standing still in the third row at 0900 in full dress, exactly where he had been told to be. "Parts of it were," she said, "but I'm okay." "Yeah?" Maya said. She seemed to consider this sufficient, because she was 12 and time moved differently at 12. And she said, "Uncle James made meatloaf 3 times while you were gone. I need you to know that." Elena laughed. It came out of her fully, without effort, the first real laugh in 9 days. And it surprised her slightly, the way a muscle surprises you when you use it after a long rest. "I'll make something better," she said. "You always do," Maya said. Elena sat in the briefing room of Pine Valley Military Training Base with the phone against her ear and her shaved head and her healing arm and the quiet certainty of a woman who had come somewhere to do a hard thing and had done it. And she talked to her daughter for 20 minutes about meatloaf and school and a book she was reading and a friend who had said something worth discussing. And none of it had anything to do with any of what had happened in this yard for 9 days. And all of it had everything to do with why any of it had ever mattered. She flew home 2 days later. The base was under new interim command. The evaluation report had been filed. The referrals were in process. The people who needed to face what they had done were facing it. The people who had shown something worth keeping were being given the chance to build on it. When her plane broke through the clouds on the descent into Maryland, she looked out the window at the ordinary gray and green of a fall afternoon, and she let herself simply be a woman going home to her daughter. Not an investigator, not a colonel, not the woman in the chair, just her mother. Because at the end of everything, after every notebook filled, every witness noted, every illegal order documented, every brick of the case laid in its precise and irrefutable place, the thing that had kept her sitting still in that chair in the middle of that yard, the thing that had kept her face even and her voice quiet and her hands steady through 9 days of being treated like she was nothing, was not duty. It was the simple, absolute knowledge of who she was going home to. And that was something no set of clippers, no amount of cold food, no flooded mattress, no formation of 200 watching eyes had ever come close to touching. The woman they had put in that chair, knowing nothing about her, had known everything about herself. And that had always been the only thing that mattered.